Hey friends, just a quick heads up about the video. You might see, especially during the first couple of minutes of the video, certain clips kind of blur in and out. I got a new phone and I didn't know that I had to have it on autofocus. I think that's what it's called. So I know that can be frustrating when the video quality isn't the best. So I apologize in advance. I'm aware of what I have to do now for the next following videos, but it's not enough where you won't be able to enjoy the video and understand the concept of subcooling. Enjoy the video, guys.
Hey friends, welcome to another video of training. Today we'll be talking about subcooling. What is subcooling and why is subcooling important? You're going to see how subcooling changes based on the condition that it is found. We're going to be going over high ambient temperature, low ambient temperature, an overcharged system, an undercharged system, a system that is properly charged, and a system that has a dirty condenser. You're going to see how the subcooling changes with each of these scenarios. And hopefully by the end of the video, you understand what is subcooling and why subcooling is important for HVAC systems, especially for those that have TXVs. So what is subcooling? Simply put, subcooling is heat removed from liquid after it's 100% liquid. So it is important to understand how the refrigeration cycle works. I'm briefly going to go over it, but it is important to understand. If not, subcooling kind of won't make sense. But hopefully, but just briefly going over it, you have an idea. So you have the refrigeration cycle. I only drew the high side of the system. So I have the compressor, not the best looking compressor, but it will work. I got the discharge line, I have the condenser coil, and then I have the liquid line. The idea is that coming out of the compressor, it's vapor, high pressure, high temperature vapor. We want liquid going through the metering device. Liquid is what can cause that metering device to then drop that high pressure, high temperature liquid on this side and drop it to a low pressure, low temperature saturated refrigerant. You can't really do that with vapor. So we have a condenser fan that pulls outside air in and rejects heat. We're removing heat. And so there's three stages that goes on the high side. On the discharge line, we are de-superheating. So it's vapor only, but it's very high temperature vapor. So right away, 140 degrees, we lose a lot of sensible heat. It's not latent heat. It just loses temperature. So what temperature does it have to go and hit so we can get saturated, so we can have a mix of liquid and vapor? Well, we know that because once we connect our high side pressure, 340 psi for 410A, it's 105 degrees. So once it hits 105 degrees, boom, we get saturated refrigerant. So it loses about 35 degrees of sensible heat, just sensible heat removal, still superheating. Then it enters the latent heat removal process, or the condensing, where we're condensing the vapor to liquid. And as you can see, you start developing the first molecule of liquid, and you still have vapor, but as it continues, you have more and more liquid and less vapor because we are removing the heat. So of course, with latent heat, the temperature stays the same, but once we get to where it's 100% liquid, we once again hit the sensible heat removal process. So let's say right here, it changes to 100% liquid. And this is the thing though, you don't know where exactly it changes to completely liquid. The only way to do that is by getting a temperature clamp and putting it on the liquid line. So when you subtract, and this is the formula, condensing temperature, high side pressure converted to temperature, which in this case we have 105, you subtract that with the liquid line temperature. So you put this on the liquid line. In this case, it's 105 minus 95 liquid line temperature. We have a subcooling of 10 degrees. So that means that not only did it completely change to liquid, I still dropped that liquid 10 degrees lower, below its saturation point. That's why it's heat removed from liquid after it's 100% liquid. So that's simply subcool. Subcool tells us that we have liquid going to the metering device. And it's just like the evaporator though, the condenser can also be starved, flooded, or properly charged, as you will see right now in a bit. So how is it that these systems are able to go from high pressure, high temperature vapor to liquid? Well, it falls under the principle of heat transfer. And there's three temperatures that it is very important for you to understand. And that is the condensing temperature, your liquid line temperature, and your outside air temperature. So let's pretend the system is on, it turns on. My condensing temperature, right? Because we connect our pressure port, our gauges to the pressure port, and it gives us 340 psi for 410A. We convert that to a temperature, it's 105 degrees. So 105 condensing temperature, that's your highest. The middle one is your liquid line temp. And guess what? Between the condensing temperature and your liquid line, that's your subcool. That tells us that we have liquid going to the metering device, because the metering device needs liquid, not vapor, to be able to drop in pressure. And then the lowest temperature, at least in these three, is your outside ambient air, your outside air temperature. So how is it though? And I'm sure you've seen this as you go to systems. Why is it that one system is 380 psi for 410A, another one's 420, another one's 450, another one's 480? Why is it that the pressure fluctuates? Well, it has to do with a term called CTOA, condensing temperature over ambient. And that's based on SEER. We're not going to get too much on SEER, but simply put, SEER is the seasonal energy efficiency ratio. The higher the SEER, the bigger the condenser coils, the more it can do in rejecting heat. The lower the SEER, the smaller the coils. It rejects heat, but not as good and efficiently than the bigger coils with the bigger SEERs. So between the condensing temperature and your outside air temperature, that's your CTOA, simply put. So if you're dealing with a system that is let's just for giggles, a 15 SEER system, it's a 20 degree CTOA. The ambient air is 90 degrees. What should my condensing temperature be? Well, 90 is the ambient air plus 20, that's 110 condensing temperature. Your pressure would be higher. That is why on a hot day, your high side pressure is a lot higher because of CTOA. So the CTOA is condensing temperature over ambient. And it is, of course, important to understand what SEER system you're working on. Sometimes you're not able to find out the SEER, but at least understand that is why we have higher head pressures when it's a lot hotter outside and lower head pressures when it's a lot colder outside. But that's the key. We need to have something higher so we can reject heat. And that higher thing is the condensing temperature. It needs to be higher so we can reject heat to the ambient air. And so if they're both the same temperature, how can you reject heat? You can't. You have to have the condensing temperature higher so you can reject heat to the ambient air. Even though both are hotter temperatures, but hotter air goes to less, or hotter things go to less hotter things. So it doesn't matter if they're really hot, as long as there's a temperature difference, you're going to reject heat. And that's really the principle as to why we're able to get a subcooled liquid. And there's another term, and we won't go too much into this, but it's just so you can see how that number changes as we go through the different scenarios. It's called the approach. The approach, simply put, is your liquid line temperature minus your outside air temperature. So if the liquid line is 95 and your outside air temperature is 85, your approach is 10. And typically, this is the number, rule of thumb. It can change, but 7 to 12 degrees approach. But we're only focused on subcooling. I just want you to see how that number is going to change as we go through the different scenarios. But going back to this, if you remember this concept here, you will understand subcooling. Condensing temperature, of course, with the system on, has to be higher than your ambient air, so you can reject heat and get some subcooled liquid. So now, hopefully by now you have an overall idea as to how the temperatures matter, why this is important, the CTOA. Now let's go over with the first scenario, an undercharge system. Because of all the scenarios that I'm showing you guys, all these I was already able to experiment and do live. And maybe in future videos I can do that, but there's just so much that I want to give you guys so you guys at least understand the general idea with each scenario. But look at what happens when a system is undercharged. So on this specific system, it was a package unit. It normally takes 100 ounces. So when you convert that to pounds and ounces, it's about 6 pounds and 4 ounces. What I did, I removed 4 pounds. I removed 4 and I was left with only 2 pounds. So it's an undercharged system. Okay, so my outside air temperature was 81. So when I checked my pressures, I connected my gauges, I got 75 psi, and it's a 410A system. 75 psi, you convert it to temperature for the evaporator, 18 degrees. For my head pressure, high side of the system is 260 psi, 88 degrees. Okay? My suction line was 78 degrees. Suction line was 78. Liquid line was 88. So when I calculate my superheat and subcool, my superheat was 50. You see? Superheat 50, high superheat. Do you remember what that is? A starved evaporator. The liquid boiled off too soon and it gained a lot of sensible heat, a lot of temperature. My subcooling, and this is going to be the focus here, the key. 88 condensing temperature minus liquid line, because that's the formula for subcooling. 88 minus 88, 0. And my return temperature was 78. My supply was 66. I got a delta T of 12 degrees. And my approach, it's interesting, it was 7 degrees. It was kind of in range. So that's why you're not really looking at approach. Although when we go over dirty condenser and overcharge, that's going to matter, but not in this specific case. What we're looking at is 0 subcooling. That means that I never turned to liquid. It stayed a mix of vapor and liquid. And that's not good because the metering device needs liquid to be able to drop in pressure. So less refrigerant, less mass. There's no refrigerant. And look at this right here. Because there's no difference, the heat rejection goes to latent heat. And going back to the same concept, right? There needs to be a difference in temperature. So when you go here, because my condensing temperature is 88 degrees, it's not high enough, right? And my outside air temperature was 81. There's a little bit of heat rejection, only 7 degrees. So a lot of that heat rejection, I'm trying to reject heat, and it is. A lot of it is going to my latent heat, but there's just not enough temperature difference that it never goes to 100% liquid. All that heat removal, just because, going back to this, we only have 7 degrees from high side condensing temperature to your outside air temperature. It's not enough heat difference. It's not enough. And most of that heat removal goes to latent heat. And you see I have a mix of vapor and liquid all the way. So if you go to a system, check your head pressure, convert it to a temperature, 88. You check your liquid line temperature, and it's also 88. Your subcooling is 0. You have no liquid. That's what it means. So yes, with an undercharged system, it doesn't help because if it was properly charged, that condensing temperature would be a lot higher. And if 81 is right here and 88 is right here, look at how much heat rejection I can do. How much better would it have been if the outside air temperature is right here and then my condensing temperature maybe is 91 or 101. Whatever SEER it is. But you see the bigger heat difference, more heat rejection to the ambient air. So on an undercharged system, we have less mass, less refrigerant. We can do a lot of heat rejection, so hence no subcooling. So we see the importance of heat rejection from condensing temperature to ambient. That's important, and that's the principle. On a system that was undercharged, my condensing temperature is not high enough, so I'm not able to reject heat because it's kind of close to the ambient air. So low suction pressure, low head pressure, high superheat, no subcool. So I have a starved evaporator because it's a high superheat. The liquid boiled off too soon. And then I have no subcooling because there's no heat difference, heat transfer. So with the system that is properly charged, at least on this one here, was a package unit that took about 100 ounces, 6 pounds and 4 ounces. So when you compare both, look at this one here. My head pressure is 300, 95-degree condensing temperature. When I did check it, it was 79. This one was 81. But regardless, though, look at my temperature difference. It's about, what is it, 16-degree difference. On this one, from the condensing temperature to my ambient, only 7. So here, over there on that one, I had about this much. On the properly charged system, more of a difference in temperature. So I can reject more. So that is why it was working fine, because look at my numbers. My suction pressure, it's 47 degrees. So above 32, right? I'm away from, I don't want anything below 32 degrees. And you'll see what happens with the low ambient as we go with the other scenario. But in this case, head pressure looks good. Low side pressure looks good. 95-degree condensing temperature, 47-degree evaporator temperature. My suction line temperature to get my superheat, 55 minus 47. I had 8 degrees superheat. And this was a TXV system. So it's maintaining that 8 to 12 degrees. Look at my my subcooling. And like I said, I already tested these units under these conditions. So when I checked it, it gave me a liquid line temperature of 86 degrees. So 95 minus 86, I have 9 degrees of subcooling. Now, I put right here, not a measurement with the measuring tape. I was under the impression at first that the higher the number, that means that I can like measure it 20 inches. And I thought, you know what? This is 20 inches. This is the number 20. This is where it comes from. So if it's 9 inches, so that's liquid. And yes, that was my thinking before. You can't really tell where the last molecule of vapor is gone, hence when the liquid starts. But by simply subtracting both numbers, it gives you an idea. The higher the subcooling, the more liquid you have. The lower the subcooling, the less liquid you have. At least as long as you have proper airflow, because you're going to see that number change as we go with the other scenarios. But typically, with high subcooling, you have too much liquid. Lower subcooling, you don't have enough liquid, given that you have proper airflow, right, through the condenser. So my approach, remember my approach, 86, which is my liquid line temperature, minus my ambient air, 7 degrees. We want between 7 and 12. But like I said, don't worry too much about this. The focus is the subcooling. We have 9 degrees of subcooling. My return temperature was 79 degrees. My supply was 53. I had a delta T of 26 degrees. So when I checked the system, it wasn't as humid. So I was able to do more sensible cooling. Hence not so much the 18 to 21, but I got 26, which is okay. My CTOA condensing temperature over ambient, I wasn't able to find out the SEER for that system. But if I were to take a guess, I have a 15 degree, right? A 79 minus 95 minus 79. It's what, 16 degrees? So according to this, the SEER, 13 to 15 is 20. A higher SEER, it's about 15. So I'm assuming that system was a SEER of 16 because I had a 15-degree condensing temperature over ambient. But yes, now you can see with the properly charged system and an undercharged system, the key is we need a higher condensing temperature so then we can reject more heat to the ambient. Right here, we couldn't do that. Right here, we could because we had more refrigerant. It was properly charged. So now let's go over another scenario, an overcharged system. So the opposite of an undercharged system, like we went over, is an overcharged system. An undercharged system doesn't have enough refrigerant, so it has a starved condenser. An overcharged system has too much refrigerant that has a flooded condenser. And both scenarios are not okay. An undercharged system, it's going to run you a high superheat. You won't be able to cool down the windings. They can go off of thermal overload. The compressor can shut off to protect itself. A system that is overcharged, you have too much liquid in the low side of the system, you can possibly have liquid going into the compressor. And a lot depends on how overcharged it is, what kind of metering device it's using. But simply put, you do not want to have an overcharged system. I always thought an overcharged system was better because they can do more cooling, but that's not the case, as you'll see right now. So on this specific unit, it's the same unit that I'm doing with that I'm using every scenario. I'm working on the same package unit. I overcharged the system by 3 pounds. So it takes 6 pounds. I put 3 more pounds. So it has 9 pounds, 3 pounds over. Now, airflow is good, and this is important right now. You'll see right now in a bit. Airflow going through the condenser is good. It was clean. My outside air temperature was 78 at the time when I tested it. My low side pressure was pretty low, 125 psi, 42 degrees. Now, have in mind that system, what could have happened is that it has second stage cooling. So when you activate second stage cooling, because it uses one compressor for stage 1 and stage 2 cooling, it drops down the suction pressure. So it could have happened that it wasn't stage 2 cooling. But typically, a system that is overcharged, both your low side and your high side will run higher pressures because there's just too much refrigerant, more pressure in the system. So just understand that your pressures would run higher on a system that is overcharged. I think it was running on stage 2 cooling. Regardless though, we had 125 psi, 42 degree evaporator temperature. Look at my high side. It's pretty crazy. 450, 125 degree condensing temperature. So going back to the CTOA condensing temperature over ambient, if I had an outside air temperature 78, it was a SEER 16. It's a 15 over ambient. My condensing temperature should have been 92. It's at 125. That's pretty high. So let's get our superheat suction line temperature, 47 minus 42. Superheat is 5, right? Subtract 47, 42, 5. So TXV was trying to do its job. It could have been that it had a lot of refrigerant going through because remember your higher pressure. So all this higher pressure is going to be pushing all that to the low side of the system. But this is the key right here. This is it right here. Condensing temperature minus your liquid line, which is 80. My subcooling was 45 degrees. 45. That is high. And let's go over some other stuff. Discharge line temperature was 172. I know I didn't mention this in the previous slide or previous video, but a system that is undercharged because it has a high superheat, right? It has a high superheat. It's going to run a high discharge line temperature. System that is overcharged is also going to run high, but an undercharged system is going to run a higher discharge line temperature. But once again, let's focus on subcooling, right? So subcooling is high, really high. It should be 8 to 12. My approach, and this is where I'm going to really have you pay attention to the approach. Remember approach? Liquid line temperature minus my ambient. So liquid line temperature is 80 minus my ambient. I have a 2 degree approach. That's pretty low, right? We should be between 7 and 12, but it's pretty low. Just kind of have that number in place, right? But remember, this is the key right here, 45. My return air temperature is 81. My supply air temperature was 51. I have a 30 degree temperature split. That's why people think, oh, it's overcharged. I'm doing a lot of cooling. Let's leave it like that. Well, yeah, you have liquid going through your whole coil. Your whole coil, you're doing too much cooling. You have a bigger temperature split of 30 degrees. So that's not okay though, because you're running a high head pressure. Your compressor is working harder. You're pulling more amps. It's not energy efficient. And why is it though that my head pressure goes higher? Because think about it. You have a coil, right? We have 45 degrees of subcool. That means that, let's just pretend we have a coil. And when the system's working just fine, 8 to 12, maybe it takes up 2 lines of that condenser coil, just 2 lines. But a subcooling of 45, now it takes up maybe 7 lines of that copper lining, all that liquid. We filled it up with liquid, but guess what happens? Our condensing coil, now we have less space for that latent heat. We have less space. My pressure is going higher because we have less space to reject heat. And so that's what's going on with an overcharge system. Your liquid is taking up more space of that condenser coil space, and then you have less space for when trying to reject heat. So your pressures are going to run higher. And so that's the key. With the high subcooling, your liquid is backing up, taking up more space from the condenser to reject heat. So you have a high side pressure and a high subcooling. So that will be the indicator. If your system is overcharged, you would have a high subcooling. Okay, so I intentionally put the overcharge system and the dirty condenser next to each other so you can see the difference. So on this specific system is the same package unit. It has a dirty condenser. So all I did was block off where the condenser is rejecting heat, right? It pulls air from the side, it rejects it upwards. I just put something over it. So I didn't allow it to reject heat, hence a dirty condenser. But it is properly charged, okay? It is properly charged. It has 6 pounds and 4 ounces, okay? So that's the key. It's not overcharged anymore. It is properly charged, but my condenser is dirty. All right, so look at my pressures. My low side pressure is 145 psi, converted to a temperature is 49. My head pressure is 465 psi, 128 condensing temperature. So yes, with the dirty condenser, your suction pressure is going to also run higher. And really the key is, as your head pressure goes higher, your suction pressure also kind of follows with it. It's still lower, but it's going to follow it with it. So it goes up, up, lower, 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 lower. It's kind of doing that balance, but it's not efficient because your suction pressure is pretty high. And really it should have been like this. If it wasn't dirty, it's a SEER 16 condensing temperature over ambient, so 78 plus 15. My condensing temperature should have been 98, right? I think I'm getting my math right here. Nope, it should have been 93. Okay, so 93. Yes, I still do my math like that sometimes. So it should have been a 93 condensing temperature, and I'm at 128 because if it's trying to reject heat, but I'm not allowing it, that heat is still in the condenser. It's in there, but the condensing temperature goes so high that it does eventually end up rejecting heat, as you see right here. My liquid line temperature was 105. So 128 minus 105, I had a subcool of 23. My superheat suction line temperature 60 minus 49 is 11. But this is bad quality liquid. Bad quality liquid. And why do I say that? Because the higher the liquid line temperature, the more flash gas you're going to have going through the evaporator, right? So the higher the liquid line temperature, the more, in simple terms, the more liquid has to sacrifice to kind of go down to that suction pressure. So instead of it being 80% liquid, 20% vapor, now it's 60% liquid and 40% vapor. So it's not efficient. You're sacrificing more liquid because you have a higher liquid line temperature. So my subcooling is 23, but it's not good subcooling. It's like a bad quality liquid, if you want to put it that way. My approach, and this is the difference. This is where I really want you to pay attention to the approach. My approach, remember what it is? Liquid line temperature minus my ambient. So 105 minus my ambient, 78. I have an approach of 27. 27 degrees, that's a high approach. We should be between 7 and 12. Some manufacturers will say 7 and 16. It varies, but you get the idea. It's too high. A system and this system that was overcharged, it was too low. So yes, a system that is overcharged, your approach is going to be low, really low. A system that has a dirty condenser, your approach is going to be high, because that liquid line temperature, man, it's really high. When you subtract that with the ambient, man, it's a really high approach. So in this case, this is where approach does help. But my subcooling, you can get kind of fooled with it. You're like, but I have good liquid. I got a subcooling of 23. I'm okay. You got to pay attention to the approach. You got to pay attention to the liquid line. Pay attention to the head pressure. On a 78-degree ambient air, your head pressure should not be at 465. Of course, you can have air and other stuff, but in this case, it's just a dirty condenser. You're going to run a high head pressure. But this is where the approach kind of makes sense, right? You can see the difference because it should be between 7 and 12. This one's low for an overcharge, high for a dirty condenser. My temperature split between the return and the supply, 27-degree delta T. So it seems to still be doing some cooling. But your compressor is going to be running more amps, right? Because you just increased the compression ratio. It's pumping more. You're going to be wasting a lot of energy just because the condenser is dirty. That's why you want to always clean the condenser, the evaporator, right? Airflow before charge, or tag, thermostat, airflow gauges. And then my discharge line temperature, it is running high, 182 degrees. And as I had mentioned, right, the higher the liquid line temperature, the more flash gas. So you see, both scenarios are not okay for the compressor because my head pressure is running higher. My subcooling here is way higher, and that's the key difference. A system that's overcharged, your subcooling is going to be super high, but my liquid line temperature is going to be a lot lower, right? That's the key. Overcharge, high head pressure, high subcooling, but my liquid line is a lot lower. A dirty condenser, high head pressure, you got this fake subcooling, although it is, and then your liquid line is high, too high, 105. More flash gas, less cooling. So what about low and high ambient temperatures? Let's find out what happens to the subcooling in those scenarios. So what about in cold ambient temperature? Now I did kind of exaggerate on this one. I did choose 31 degrees, but it could be 41, 51, even 60 degrees. That's pretty cold outside. What happens to the system, and especially to the subcooling, when it is cold outside? So like I said, in this case, I did exaggerate. I chose 31 degrees for 410A system. System turns on. And so my low side pressure is 99 psi, evaporator temperature of 31. My high side pressure is 170 psi. I have a condensing temperature of 60. So it kind of makes sense. In this specific case, of course, I wasn't able to do it here in a controlled environment because I couldn't get to 31 degrees here. But the principles still apply. So remember, condensing temperature over ambient, it varies depending what SEER it is, right? 15 through 30, more or less. But in this case, I chose 30, right? Close to 30. So if my ambient temperature is 31, add 30 of that, right? Because it's condensing temperature over ambient. It's a SEER, one of the lowest SEERs. So 31 plus 30, I ended up putting 60, but you get the idea, right? So it's doing its job. It raised the head pressure based on the CTOA. So I have 60 degrees condensing temperature. I have 31 degree evaporator temperature, right? So it's doing its job. It is pumping. It do have a higher head pressure and a lower suction pressure. My suction line is 41. 41 minus 31, superheat 10. Look at my subcooling. 60 minus the liquid line temperature is 45. I have subcooling. So maybe you're asking yourself now, well, I have subcooling, I got pressures, my superheat's okay. Why can't I run my system when it's cold ambient? For a couple of reasons. One, because they're trying to protect the evaporator from freezing. So if you run lower pressures, remember what I said about the head pressure and the low side pressure kind of follows it, right? It still has that difference, right, in pressure, but it follows it. Well, my head pressure is really low, my suction pressure is going to be a lot lower. So my evaporator freezes if it's below 32 degrees. So one is to protect the evaporator. That evaporator must be above 32 degrees so it doesn't freeze. My compressor becomes less efficient. It doesn't work like that in colder ambient temperatures. This compressor is different than compressors that work on refrigeration systems like walk-in coolers and all that. There are different types of compressors, but air conditioning compressors, they do more comfort cooling. They cannot operate in cold ambient temperatures. At least the ones that you normally see. I'm sure they're coming out with newer compressors that can handle all that, but typically compressors like the ones that you see maybe day to day, they cannot operate in cold temperature. Another thing too, you need a bigger pressure drop to move the refrigerant. Remember, it's only 60 degrees on the condensing, 31 here, so it's about this much. They're almost the same. You need to have a higher head pressure, lower suction pressure, because what's important is also the velocity of the refrigerant. They refer to it as the mass flow. You want refrigerant to move and make it back to the compressor. If you run it on colder ambient, your velocity of the refrigerant is going to move a lot slower. And guess what's going to happen? What carries the oil? The refrigerant. And that could damage your compressor if you're not getting oil back to the compressor. So lower ambient is going to possibly cause no oil to go to the compressor. You have lower mass flow. So yes, you still get subcooling, but it doesn't matter. It goes back to what the manufacturers tell you. Turn on the equipment when indoor air temperature is above 68 or 70 and outdoor air temperature is above 68 or 70 degrees, whatever the manufacturer tells you, at least for that specific unit. So yes, a cold ambient, we got to be careful in running systems like that. Sometimes they can do fan control systems. I believe that's what they call, where you shut off the condenser fan to pick up the head pressure. And like that, you'll be able to run it. You need to just buy a little component that looks at ambient air temperature, and then it sends power to the condenser fan, or it turns it off based on the ambient air temperature. In that case, it would work. If not, we have to be careful running it in cold ambient temperature. So what about high ambient, right? We're typically gonna see more of this scenario when we're dealing with air conditioning systems and working on them. Higher ambient. So let's say the airflow is good, right? The airflow is good. Condensing coil is clean. Evaporator coil is clean. So in this case, we have an outside air temperature of 100 degrees, right? So it's a pretty hot day. And so let's say we're dealing with a SEER of 12, okay? So that's, what is that? 25. So ambient air, right, for a SEER 12, ambient air plus 25, that should be my condensing temperature. So 100 plus 125, sure enough, there we go. Our head pressure is 446, 125 degrees. Our suction pressure is 137 psi, higher suction pressure. My suction line temperature is 55, so 55 minus 48, superheat of 7. So what about subcooling? Yes, whether you're in cold ambient or high ambient, you're always going to have subcooling. People think when it's really, really hot, you're not going to have any subcooling. If it's properly charged and there's good airflow, you got to follow the principle of CTOA, condensing temperature over air. Of course, though, when you're running the system on when it's really hot, your head pressure is going to be off the roof. That's why when it's really hot, your systems, the head pressure runs really, really high. But of course, this is different than a dirty condenser, because a dirty condenser, we added plus 25, and because it was dirty, we added like another 25 because it was dirty. So in that case, it would have been 150 degrees if it was dirty. We don't want to add this. That's why we want to clean the condenser. We want to just go off of this principle, CTOA, condensing temperature over ambient. So yes, you do lose efficiency when it's hot because of the following. And look at what happens here, right? So we said superheat is 7. My liquid line, it's 110. Subcooling is 15. So we do have subcooling, but look at my liquid line temperature. It's too high. So I'm going to have more flash gas going through the low side of the system. That is why you lose efficiency. When you run the system where it's really hot and the sun's beating into it, it's just everything's running higher, and you're going to have typically more flash gas going through the low side of the system. You still have some cooling, but you have more flash gas. You do lose some cooling capacity when it runs on really high ambient temperature. And then my approach here, it's okay, right? It's still doing its job. My approach, liquid line temperature 110 minus 100, which is the outside air temperature. That's 10 degrees approach. And my it should be between 7 and 12, more or less, rule of thumb. But going back to this though, high ambient, yep, we have subcooling. That tells me we have some liquid on the condenser, but it's just, I have a really high liquid line temperature. And in this case, like I said, higher liquid line temperature, more flash gas, less cooling, because cooling is in the liquid, right? So that's kind of the key. But yes, high ambient or cold ambient, both will produce some subcooling. But have in mind though, this one is slower velocity, going from the high side to the low side. This one is high velocity. My high head pressure definitely is going to push that refrigerant to go through. You're going to have good velocity, but you lose efficiency because of the high liquid line temperature. I hope you have a better understanding of what subcooling is. Yes, our condenser can either be operating normal, starved, or flooded, based if it's overcharged, undercharged, low ambient, high ambient, if you have a dirty condenser, so many factors. And I know you guys are used to me actually teaching and then showing you the unit, but I thought, well, I'm gonna go ahead and work on all these scenarios, get real life data, so I can just show you guys, and then you can take that knowledge and apply it in your service calls. And I also want to say, I really want to thank every single one of you. I really appreciate all the comments that I've been receiving on my videos. They really mean a lot. Thank you. It helps me to continue going and pushing forward. It motivates me to produce more videos. And if there's any videos that you guys want me to work on, just let me know. I know some of you have suggested certain topics. I take note of them so I can start preparing on them. Currently right now I'm trying to do a video on inverters. I'm almost close to mastering it, but not quite yet. I want to be able to master it in such a way that I can teach it easily to you guys. So that's almost there. Videos like electrical diagrams, how to read them, schematics. That's important as well, right? 80% of our calls are electrical. And I think I might have mentioned it on one of my posts. They've enabled me to have channel memberships. And I don't expect any of you to do those memberships. I'm still gonna be producing free videos for you guys, but I will be opening up that channel membership for those that maybe wanna talk with me on a weekly basis. I was thinking maybe every week at a certain time, a certain hour, with those that subscribe to the channel as a member. You guys can tell me 3 things you guys want to know, 2 or 3 things, and I can go to a unit and talk to you guys live. So that's the idea behind that. I'm gonna start to work on that. But like I said, you don't have to do that. I'm still gonna be producing free videos for you guys, just because I know how hard it is when you're starting off. I started off with not a lot of knowledge, and I almost didn't make it in the HVAC industry. But it's just a matter of not giving up, and it's just a matter of time before you understand a concept. Guys, I really hope today's video helped you out, and I will catch you guys in the next one.